Top 5 musicians who hated Paul McCartney. Since the early 1960s, Paul McCartney has been a rock and roll icon, gaining fame as a key member of the Beatles. His talent for crafting catchy melodies and meaningful lyrics played a crucial role in the band's cultural impact. McCartney's innovative bass lines added depth and complexity to rock and pop music. After the Beatles disbanded nearly a decade later, he successfully launched a solo career and formed Wings, where he experimented with various genres and produced hits like Band on the Run, Jet, and Live and Let Die. Wings became one of the 1970s most successful bands, showcasing McCartney's vast musical talents beyond his Beatles contributions. However, McCartney has earned a reputation for being challenging to collaborate with. While many fans praise him as friendly and easygoing, several celebrities have a different perspective. Here are 5 musicians who have expressed their disdain for Paul McCartney. Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones has never hesitated to share his strong opinions. One of his most controversial remarks came during a 2018 interview with New York Magazine, where he shared his harsh view of the Beatles. Jones didn't hold back, referring to the Beatles as no-playing and criticizing their musical abilities. He called them the worst musicians in the world and singled out Paul McCartney, saying, "Paul was the worst bass player I ever heard." Despite Jones's remarks, McCartney is often credited with transforming the bass guitar's role in popular music, with his bass lines being integral to the Beatles' distinctive sound. Ginger Baker. Paul McCartney has often expressed the belief that a musician doesn't need classical training to be great, a sentiment that has encouraged many self-taught songwriters. However, Cream's Ginger Baker saw this as a sign of McCartney's lack of true musical talent. Cream's Ginger Baker believed that genuine musical talent should include classical training, which he used to critique McCartney. In a 2015 Forbes interview, Baker expressed disdain for musicians who couldn't read or write music, including McCartney, stating, "Even Paul McCartney needs someone to write it down for him. And he thinks that's good." He also referenced an article where McCartney claimed that learning to read music might hinder his songwriting ability. Baker dismissed this, stating that his skepticism toward the Beatles went back to the early 1960s, that they didn't know a hatchet from a crotchet. George Harrison. By the late 1960s, Paul McCartney had gained the capability to visualize not only melodies and chord progressions but also complete arrangements in his mind prior to entering the studio. He increasingly had a clear vision of how he wanted his songs to sound, which created creative friction within the band. George Harrison, the youngest member of the Beatles, was responsible for penning some of their most legendary tracks, such as Something, Here Comes the Sun, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. However, Harrison experienced tensions with McCartney. In interviews, he often mentioned his frustration with McCartney's control during recording sessions, feeling that McCartney frequently dismissed his input, which contributed to growing resentment. Harrison admitted that during the recording of Let It Be, the tension escalated to such a degree that he temporarily left the band. He later disclosed that many years of collaboration with McCartney had left him feeling terribly unhappy. In a revealing interview, he stated, "I had no confidence in myself as a guitar player after spending so much time with Paul McCartney. He ruined me as a guitar player." John Lennon. The complex relationship between John Lennon and McCartney began in their Liverpool days, characterized by a strong collaborative spirit. However, by 1968, their connection had started to deteriorate, with tensions exacerbating after the Beatles' breakup in 1970, for which McCartney was initially blamed. Lennon criticized McCartney's music after the split, particularly in his song How Do You Sleep? Despite the conflicts, they managed to reconcile before Lennon's tragic death in 1980, and McCartney has expressed gratitude that they were on good terms at that time. Phil Collins. Phil Collins has publicly admitted to holding a grudge against McCartney stemming from an unpleasant encounter nearly 20 years ago. Collins recounted a disappointing meeting with McCartney and his then-wife Heather Mills at Buckingham Palace early in the 2000s. While seeking an autograph on his first edition book about the Beatles, Collins felt insulted by McCartney's dismissive remark about being a fan, noting, "I never forgot it." He remarked that McCartney had a way of making him feel inferior during their conversation. Are these critiques of Paul McCartney justified, or are they merely part of the territory for one of the most famous musicians in history?